Hi, it's time to get started on lesson 6. Beautiful old rose with all those petals and create dramatic lighting because of the way the petals sometimes have such volume and the inside is so much darker than the outside, and gives you an opportunity to use really dramatic light, which I like to do. So get yourself a rose, as I've done here. And I've picked one that's quite a bit open, that has quite a lot of small petals inside, and it still isn't completely open yet, so there's still a cup shape. And here's a picture of my rose next to a peony to show you. Peonies have a similar form to a rose, so you could always draw one of those as well. So here's an old print of a red dute rose to see how he uses his light source and also how he does his leaves beautifully. And another old botanical print, clearly with the same idea of using this light source for dramatic results. So the first thing you want to think about is, are you positioning your light on your rose from the left side or the right side? Once you get that idea in your mind, the difference, set up your light source. Here I've done my light source from the right side this time because I'm left-handed. And then I've taken an image, I've taken a photo of my rose, and then I've turned it into a grayscale so I can see the different way. I can focus on the lights and the shadows for a minute to get it inside my head without having to think about the color. And then I've shown you a close-up inside the rose so you can see what's going on with those complicated petals. And here's a preview of all the different steps we're going to do in this lesson today. It's quite complicated. So we're going to start with a rough of a light source sketch, and then we're going to draw the flower in real time, measuring accurately. Then we'll start toning for the overlapping areas of the petals and where the leaves come in. And then after we've got the light source on the overlap started, we'll work on toning with our one light source to create that simple form. Thinking of the overall cup shape, then we'll layer in some watercolor, or you can work with plain pencils if you prefer, making sure to leave the highlights. Continuing after to layer color, getting good contrast and saturated color, and we'll finish up this complicated rose. Keep in mind, this rose took me probably 12 hours to draw, so that I will be showing you these steps, but not in real time, because I don't think you're going to want to sit here for 12 hours with me. But it's a good idea before you start to have a rose where you pull apart some petals so that you can figure out what colors you want to use to draw the flower, and also to practice drawing different petals, because the petals vary in color and size and shape depending on if they're outer petals or inside petals. So practice that at some point. Okay, so now we're going to work on the light source thumbnail sketch. So I'm getting an overall idea of the simple cup shape that I see in the center of this flower. Okay, and then how the petals kind of fold and wrap around that and open out from that central cup. So just to give you an idea of what I'm thinking about as I draw this, there's the main cup shape, and then as the petals fold out, the larger petals fold out around that cup shape. So now I'm giving an idea of drawing those, but this again is just a roughly life size, and then here's where it gets really complicated, because once you've got the petals on the outside mapped out, then you have to start thinking about what's going on inside that cup, which is full of these tons of these tiny little petals, and they're all going out of that center axis but in many different directions. So I'm just here getting an overview of what that might look like in a drawing, so that I can think about, well, how am I going to A, draw that, and B, how am I going to tone it with that light source? Because the dramatic light source creates this wonderful, vibrant
three-dimensional looking flower. So here I'm mapping in. Now keep in mind, when you're looking at your real flower, you have two things you're looking at, because you've got the toning in darks to light for light, and then there might be some differentiation in the color inside your flower as well, because when the petals are smaller and they haven't opened out yet and continue to grow, they're often darker in color. My petals are darker and pinker, and then as they open out, they get paler and lighter. So that's something else to keep in mind and not get confused with. Hopefully, your petals will cooperate and be darker in the center, which is great, because that's where you want the darker color anyway, because that's where you're creating that dramatic contrast in the light of what's inside the cup and what's outside the cup. So here I'm outlining, all right, where am I going to get very, very dark in this drawing? So this is just an overview map of my light source. Here you go, a concept sketch map, okay, with the right light source showing the shadows and the highlight. Once you have that, we'll move on to the next step, which is to draw the rose accurately and life size. Now this is going to take you a little bit of time, so be patient while you draw your rose. Okay, so to draw, you're going to measure the same way we've done before. You want to find the elliptical shape for this inside, thinking of this shape as a cup. Measure the foreshortening of the inside of the flower. Then look at the shape and measure that. Make sure you use your center axis at all times. And now start to add tone, emphasizing your overlapping areas, your petals, your leaves, the inside versus the outside of the cup. And now you can start toning inside and look at the inside of your flower in detail and start to make sense of all these different petals with a bit of toning. I start by toning the areas that are going to be much darker, and I start adding my tone. Same way I did this on the bud in the open flower. I am using that dark wine color to determine where I need my dark tones. I refer back, obviously I look at my real flower and I look at my thumbnail sketch that I did to remind me and to help me. And I carefully do a nice redraw on each petal and get my variation of all the edges and the way they ruffle, and they have variation. I'm doing that now. I lightly do that with the wine color, and then I'll add some tone because I'm really going to be drawing inside this petal and adding the tone. So now I'm doing a bit of shading. And I start my shading pale and I will build it slowly because this is quite a complicated flower. I mean, it took me probably 8 to 12 hours to draw this flower. And as I did it, I thought, wow, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe this lesson should have stopped with the rosebud because the flower is quite complicated. And I don't want you all to get frustrated. But gosh, who doesn't want to try to do a big Old English rose such as this one if you have the opportunity? I picked up a different color pencil there, my earth green, because some of my outer petals are quite light and quite pale, and I didn't want to get them too dark at first. So that's why I switched to toning on those with another lighter color. And then back here to the wine to tone again behind where it's really dark in the shadow areas of that cup. This video is sped up quite a bit just to give you the idea of what I'm trying to do. You can see that how by shading behind, I'm pushing that cup in front, and now under this petal, I'm shading. Now I've picked up a gray color. I've used quite a bit different colors to do my toning on this rose because there's a lot of variation on this rose, from the outside pale petals to the pinker, brighter petals inside that are still smaller and haven't opened up completely yet. So there's a lot to think about, and you know what? It's just by taking the time to really study the rose and try to draw it, it's almost like you're a little insect inside that rose, maybe collecting pollen and nectar. It's just a whole world in there, and I feel honored that I get to experience it this way by trying to draw it and study it. So I welcome, I give you all the same opportunity, whether your skill level is at a point where you feel confident in drawing this rose or not, you still can learn about it and enjoy the process. So I'd like you to try to think of it that way rather than focus on a finished drawing, okay? Because it's a long process to draw a rose like this, and it takes quite a lot of time. And perhaps the first few times you do draw the rose, you may not be happy with your drawing, but you'll learn from it, and it's all a way of building on this. And so now here I am drawing these larger outer petals, and I'm carefully adding some tone and trying to put in, again, this is nothing new, I've talked about this, the way that petal varies a little bit and rolls, and sometimes I tone behind the petal in front, adding shade, but before I can do that I have to make sure I have a good idea of how the edge of that petal in front is going to be, and so I'm defining that here by drawing the way it rolls over a little bit. And truthfully, now that I have done this drawing, which you're watching it develop, but I'm talking as right now to give you the details on how I drew this rose after it was finished. Because as I mentioned before, when I draw the rose, I don't talk because I want to try to draw it and get it done. If I started to talk while I drew, it would take twice as long. So I drew the whole rose, and right now I am doing my voiceover, and I'm looking at my completed rose, and guess what? I want to draw another one now. I did okay on this rose, but I think I could do better if I was to do it again, and I'm hoping that I get the opportunity soon to do another one, because every time you do one, you learn so much and you build on that. And so even though I've been drawing for years now, I always look forward to my next drawing. And I love to draw the same plants and flowers over and over again, especially ones like this that are so complicated, because I build on that knowledge each time and discover something different. And truthfully, I just love the process of doing the drawings and studying nature and smelling the roses. And so it's not really so much always about a finished drawing, but the process is something that I really love, and I want to instill in all of you who are learning to draw as well. And as I keep going here, I'm moving around the rose, really very similar to how I told you, I walked you through my rosebud, but this is just even more complicated than that. So here I'm using a pink to go inside and start to define how each of those petals inside starts and how it's shaded, what direction it goes back into the center of the petal from. I mean, it's really complicated. And you can see here, I'm showing you again what my real rose looked like, the photograph of it, because sure, that rose is long gone now. I drew this drawing a couple of weeks ago. But I'm trying to make sense out of each of these petals. And this takes quite, as you can imagine, a bit of time to do. And sometimes I'm showing you these drawing stages slowly, and other times I speed them up a bit, depending on whether I think you need to see me do it in real time or I can speed it up a little bit. But you can see how I'm sort of going around this, creating all the different petals. And sometimes I lose my place, I have to tell you, I've known people sometimes I take a little piece of tape and I mark where I am on my drawing, and I put the tape or a little piece of paper near the petal I'm drawing so I can try to remind myself where I am and not lose my place. And now I think I'm going to work on the leaf right next to the rose to give some good contrast. And I'm redrawing. I did a light outline of the leaf, and now I'm going in. I do that as a smooth edge, and now because this leaf has a serrated edge or a toothed margin, I'm carefully looking at my leaf and drawing right along the light outline. That's when I put in the details of a leaf like this. And it comes to quite a bit of a point, and now I'm drawing the other side. And I carefully draw each serrated edge. And you see how I switch where I start to do the serrated edge because it was hard for me to continue drawing there from left to right. So now I'm going from right to left. Does that make sense? Okay, and once I have that, now I can do the fun part. Okay, I redraw my veining, my center vein, and then I'm going to be able to add some toning, which is always, okay, I'm indicating first the direction of the secondary veins, and I like to get that started accurately. Just an outline, just a light suggestion of where the secondary veins, how they grow and go out to the outer edge of the leaf. Once I have that, I can start adding my tone, which I like to do because then I can have some nice good contrast against this flower. I'm always looking for those moments. So before I can tone the leaf, though, I have to redraw the outer edge of the flower a little bit, and now I can add some of my tone. And I'm doing it here with the dark sepia because my leaves on my rose are going to end up being quite dark and shiny, which is great because they'll give really nice contrast against the paleness of the rose. And this is the shadow side of my leaf because the rose is casting a bit of shadow on the rose. On the leaf, the rose is casting a shadow. So I know I'm going to get it very dark in the end, but you can see just by toning the shadow of the leaf, it does it pushes that rose on top. And that's always what I'm trying to do. I'm emphasizing where things overlap and where can I create a good amount of contrast so that I can create the feeling of depth. And you can see that that's happening right here by my toning. And then, of course, I've just described this before. So I had those secondary veins, so I do my toning I follow along the way the secondary veins grow, and it gives me a little bit of a feeling of that veining without having to overemphasize the veining. Okay, now I'm working here on the other side of the leaf, and you can see I'm putting in those tiny little crinkles, the variation on the edge of the petal, and that's where all the beauty is, taking the time to create that irregular edge. And then I tone next to it. And what will happen is by doing this toning, that petal will feel like it's on top. And I'm just going around this leaf, kind of creating the shading where I need it. And take my time and I do it before I do the whole. Here I am. Now I'm coming closer to that edge. I wanted to see how I wanted to tone the rest of it before I got in right close to that edge. But you see how that's starting now to act as a nice backdrop for the flower. So the leaf has a couple of different purposes. First, as I mentioned early in this video about a rose leaf and what they look like, is part of the way you identify a rose. It also, so that's one function, is to help identify this as a rose versus, let's say, a peony, but also it's to act as a nice backdrop. And now I'm doing the same thing on the leaf that's next to, on the other side of this flower. And now I'm speeding up, but I'm doing the same thing on the other leaf. And here I'm filling it in. And there's the leaf, so you can sort of see what I'm doing to get an idea of how I start that with the sepia. And I'm working a bit on, oh, it's fun to work like this, isn't it? It goes so much faster. Okay, so now I can go back in. I've got that nice backdrop, and I can continue working on this flower. So again, I'm just doing the same thing over and over, which is refining now the petals, getting the edges right, and continuing to add that overlapping tone. And I switch colors when I'm on outer petals that are paler if need be. And I keep making my way around this flower, which is a big flower with a lot of petals, and I keep talking to myself over and over again about creating good contrast, good depth, so that I get that dramatic look that I'm hoping to achieve in my flower. And I'm working on all of the outer petals behind the sort of area that's the cup shape of the petal, of the flower. And I add a little tone in one place and then a little in another, and then I look at it and decide where it needs more tone, and I just keep going from there. And remember that this part is all sped up, so it's much faster. And you can see as I start to add more tone on the outer petals, it starts to help that inner part stand out more. And then when I need to refine some of my drawing on my edges of the petals, I do that. And I can continue. So there I just cut in a little bit on a petal and added more leaf there. And don't forget to keep referring back to that cup shape and the light source on that cup shape, because now I'm going to apply a layer of watercolor, but I'm going to leave the highlight as the color of the paper. I don't want to forget. So look, I've accented where I'm going to leave the color of the paper so that I can go on and not forget where those main highlights are. You have to keep reminding yourself that. And now I'm starting to put some more darker areas inside the cup of the flower, and you can see I've left some very light areas to indicate the highlighted area on the flower. And I'm working in watercolor now because it's such a delicate rose. I decided, sometimes I don't know, should I do it in color pencils? Should I do it in watercolor? And I go back and forth and I try different things throughout the same painting. And I encourage you also to see what you like to do. And sometimes a flower talks to me and tells me, why don't you use watercolor this time? Or just stick with the pencil so you'll have more control. And sometimes I go back and forth, and truthfully in the end, I might have started because, I don't know, the pencil was right there and I just picked it up and used it. Or I'm thinking about the watercolor and it happens to be that I decide, okay, I'll do this in watercolor. So it doesn't always matter, because in the end I often get to the same place. I just get there in different ways at different times. And I also like to show you how I do things a little bit differently. So here I am showing you what it's like when I work with watercolor, and how I put down some of the color and then blend it and spread it a little bit. You can see the color goes down. Sometimes I add that water and try to spread it. See how it goes down dark, and then with the water brush I spread it and make it gradual. That's one way to do it. I'm leaving a little bit of light there where I'm going to work on. You can see just a little bit of the stamens there. Eventually I'll make those a golden color. And I'm working my way around, adding the darks all around the cup, the sort of elliptical inside of that cup shape where I want my petals to be darker. and pinker because they are that way on the real flower. Sometimes you can just kind of watch what I do, and I don't really talk about it. Again, when I use the watercolor, I put down some of the pigment and then spread it a bit. And now I'm going over it with another wash just to see inside where can I darken it a bit, where it needs to be a little bit darker so that the inside will seem pinker and darker, and then it will help make the outer petals seem paler and lighter, which is my goal. And there's a lot of petals here, so I keep working all the way around this, building this very slowly, as you can see. And again, I have sped this up, more and more layers. And some more. You see how it goes down dark? Then I'm creating another edge of the petal, and I spread it with water. Okay, and now, yeah, I just continue to layer the color. I'm going back in now with the pencils when I want more control and to get darker. And I'm shadowing more. And this time I've got my very thin pencil, which is always good to use when I want to keep it with more detail and more control. And so I'm working my way around, thinking about the outer petals and where they're going to have a bit of shadow again, and on the cup itself to create that feeling of that three-dimensional rounded cup. So I think of that light source and adding tone on the outer edges where it goes away from the light, and more, as you can see. I just build and build my layers of shadow and darker tones versus where I keep it lighter. And you can see that the cup is starting to come out a little bit more, and I'll need to go around that a bit more too, but I'm just working right now on those outer petals that have quite a lot of shadow. And so I can add my tone with the pencil right over what I've got underneath it and then feather it in. And this kind of flower, I have to work on a lot of different areas and just kind of bounce back from one to the other because it all relates to what I've done before and what I continue to do. So you can see here the same idea of shading behind that petal that's in front. I'm adding some tone there so that that petal below it will be pushed out and more in front. And I have to think about those edges always to make sure I don't get them too clunky. And I keep looking back at my real flower to create this drawing, right? And take a little bit of time to look things over. Now I'm going in with a pale pink. And here again, I know I need to leave a highlighted area. So I'm working that light pink in, and I'm going to leave something where I don't put the tone down, right about there. And now I'm darkening everything else so that where I've left that lighter tone will be more evident and will show up more. So I'm taking a nice layer of pink over all of this. But I kind of want to try to keep the outer petals looking lighter than the inner petals. But at the same time, I do have to have some tone on those and some color. And I darken on the petals underneath, of course, to keep the petals on top lighter. And you can see I've been using a lot of different colors on this drawing because the tones vary so much. I'm trying just to see if I can get it to look like the shadow color on the pink rose. And more layers of pink. And yeah, I just keep working all around the flower and approaching that highlight, but leaving that. And there's a little bit of a kind of a fold or a ripple in that petal, and so I'm trying to have it look like that, and that's quite complicated. Sometimes I look back at this drawing and I'm thinking, oh, I'd like to do it again. I think I said that already, but it's true, I would like to do it again. And next time I'll probably do it better. And now I want to just show you how I finish the petal or the leaf on the right and get it really, really dark. So I've got a few layers of watercolor and pencil on this leaf. And now I'm coming in with really, really dark green and sepia. And I'm really pressing hard. And I'm saturating this leaf because I want to get it to look like quite a dark leaf. And I want it to feel quite shiny. And so to do that, I need to create more contrast between the darker areas on the leaf and the highlighted area. So I leave the highlighted area a bit lighter, and then I'm coming in really, really dark. And then I'm going to blend all those tones a bit more, but just to show you the idea of how if you leave a really light highlight against dark tones, how it starts to feel like shininess. And so I continue to saturate that leaf, and I encourage you to go for it and not be afraid. Often people are afraid to get darker. They think, I don't want to ruin it, it looks okay, it looks pretty good. What if I get too dark? Well, sometimes it's great to really push yourself, because you can see a little bit of my leaf on the left and how dark it is, and I think it looks really good. And the leaf on the right is still a little boring, pale, not quite the characteristic of the leaf. So look here, I put a real leaf right next to my drawing so I could work on those serrated edges a bit. Always remember, work from the real plant if you can, because your memory is never as good as looking at the real thing and trying to copy it and match what you see. And so here I am going on the other side of that leaf, and I'm sorry again for my hair being in the way. I've got to cover those curls when I work, because as you can see here, I'm probably leaning down a bit closer to get the detail and make sure I do a good job on this leaf. And when I do that, my hair gets in the way. So I apologize, but here again you can see what I'm doing. Okay, I'm working next to that center vein and working on the right side of that leaf to darken it and to bring the veins out a bit more and to leave a shiny highlight on this side. So I'm trying to do all those things at once. And I love the way you can push certain concepts on the rose, because the leaves are really kind of interesting and they can feel like they're folding and bending in space, creating nice areas to get some good contrast and good shine. And that's what I'm trying to do here. So I'm using a dark green and I'm darkening it and then feathering it out. And then I take my white. I'm using white on this because this kind of a leaf has a feeling of, it's a very dark green, it's a little bluish, the color green, and the highlight can be done with white over the green, and so it's a cool green. And I think it works really well on this, to have it be a cool grain. So that's why I'm using white for my burnishing in this case instead of ivory when I want it to be a cooler grain. And then after I do the burnishing, I go back in and blend my dark green a little bit more into that highlighted area. And I can continue to do this until, you know, I think it will really represent that leaf. So there, you can see it's much darker now. I think that's better. Okay, so now again I can bring out that edge of the petal a little bit more by going really dark underneath it by the leaf. You can see I'm doing that, and I'm still adding the suggestion of the veining and still getting it darker and darker. I mean, I go so many more layers than you can imagine, and I go back and forth between the dark and then the burnishing and then over that and blend it all together. So you can spend quite a bit of time on the different parts of this drawing. It's nice to include a couple of leaves with your flower for good contrast. And also because it's a rose and you want people to know it's a rose. And now I picked up my stem with my leaves, and I'm going to finish out the rest of this stem. So again, I'm looking at the real stem, and I love to draw the bottom, that cut little bottom edge on a stem, especially on a rose. So first I'm just drawing that, and then of course when it's time to tone it, I'm going to think about my cylinder. And now here is the completed rose with the stem and a couple of leaves drawn. And I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you will enjoy doing your own drawing of a rose.